You are watching KOCT's North County Roundtable.
Welcome to the KOCT Roundtable, and thanks for joining us. I'm Alison St. John, and my co-host Kent Davey is away this month. Today we're going to talk about an issue that Oceanside residents are voting on in this primary election, the issue of whether to change the way two key Oceanside city officials are chosen. Should we change from electing the city treasurer and the city clerk to having them appointed by the city manager? We've all received our ballots in the mail already, so if you're wondering which way to vote on Measure K, that's the name of this, Measure K, stay with us, because here to help us understand the pros and cons of these two positions are Colleen O'Hara. She served on the Oceanside City Council for 2 terms in the 1990s and has also served on several other boards, including the Oceanside Museum of Art and the Women's Resource Centre. We also have Dennis Martinek, who is a retired professor of business economics and urban planning. He is a former Oceanside Planning Commissioner and was the president and operations manager at Brother Benno's. The format of this program will begin with a 1-minute opening statement from each representative and 2 minutes at the end for a closing statement or offer of a response to any comments made during the course of the program. Each side will be allowed up to a minute to answer a question. So let's begin with arguments. First of all, let's start with arguments in favor of Measure K. Colleen, go ahead.
Thank you, Allison. I support this measure because I believe that the two positions of treasurer and city clerk are, it's very important that we have qualified people in those positions. Right now, all it takes is for someone to be 18 years of age, living in the city of Oceanside, and registered to vote. The city treasurer oversees our portfolio in the city of $350+ million. Needs to make sure that they're invested properly and protected for the citizens of Oceanside. My personal portfolio is a heck of a lot less than the city's, and I would not turn my meager little portfolio over to someone who did not have a financial background and a great deal of experience. The city clerk directs our elections, which have become increasingly complicated and challenging. The clerk also serves as the compliance officer for the city to make sure that we are complying with all federal, state, and local laws.
Okay, thanks very much. You've come to the end of your time, and we'll, of course, expand on that as we go along here.
Okay.
So, Dennis, you are opposed to Measure K. Go
I
ahead.
am. So the question is, why vote against Measure K? And the question is it better for the citizens of Oceanside to elect the city clerk and the city treasurer, or have those positions appointed by the city manager, who is appointed by the city council? And office holders who are elected by voters are responsible to the citizens who elect them. So they become watchdogs for the citizens. In Oceanside, you have an elected city treasurer and a city clerk, and those positions, those individuals, are watchdogs for the citizens of Oceanside. If Measure K passes, it'll be a situation where those positions will be appointed by the city manager. But let me read what the pamphlet that we received with our voters' information says will happen if Measure K passes. And that's, as appointed officers, the city clerk and city treasurer will report to and serve at the pleasure of the city manager. And
Okay.
my question is that what we want? And I
Good.
say no.
Okay, thank you so much for your opening statements. So now I understand that there's probably just 4 other cities in San Diego County who still elect their city clerk and their city treasurer. We've got Carlsbad, and they actually do have some requirements for their city treasurer. and La Mesa and National City, who's going to be voting on this issue, I believe, in March also. So I want to ask you, Dennis, first of all, why is it that we should be bucking this trend where almost all the cities in the county already have their officials appointed by the city manager?
Well, Oceanside is unique in the way it's handling those positions. The city treasurer, for example, isn't the only person that's involved in investing the city's money. The treasurer has a team or is part of a team. And if you include the Citizens Investment Oversight Committee, that team is about 10 individuals who are experts in financing. So we do have that body of individuals. I feel we do not need an additional person with expertise. What we need is someone to supervise and work with that team to make sure that they're abiding by the city's investment policy.
Thank you. So, Colleen, is it true then that perhaps there's something different about the way the roles are defined in Oceanside, or do you feel like Oceanside should follow the trend of the other large cities in the region?
Well, I never believe in doing something just because there's a trend to it. But I do believe that the two positions we are taking a look at need highly qualified people in them. The city treasurer with some financial background, a city clerk who knows all of the laws that he or she is going to have to make sure that the city is following.
Do you think that if the city redefined the roles so that they did have to have those qualifications, maybe they could continue to be elected? If there were more qualifications so that the voters knew that there were some qualifications required, might that make a difference?
That would certainly help, but I think there are other reasons for
Appointing them.
for having appointed people. You know, we appoint our police chief, we appoint our fire chief, our planning director. They're all people who come to us with college degrees, a lot of experience, training, and Oceanside is no longer the small little burg that it used to be. It's growing up and needs to act that way.
So, I mean, that's a good point, Dennis, that there are other city officials, important city officials, who are being appointed at this point. Why is it that the treasurer and the clerk should be elected?
Well, those two positions especially need someone to represent the citizens. Those individuals in other cities with appointed city clerk and city treasurer are responsible to the people who hire them. And I feel with Oceanside, we have a city treasurer and a city clerk who are responsible to the people in Oceanside, to the citizens of Oceanside. And that's the way I want it. I want them responsible to me, not to the people who hired them. The watchdog situation is so critical. The idea of having some independence so that they're willing to speak up without fear of losing their jobs. And as far as the qualifications, the city treasurer and the city clerk have the same qualifications as your mayor and city council. So it's up to the people at election time to decide whether or not those individuals are qualified. And we have the technical skills with other team members. We don't need to duplicate that with someone who can act as a supervisor and again make sure that the policies for the investments in the city are consistent with our rules.
Okay, but the portfolio, the city's portfolio, $350 million is really a large sum of money to be managing. So, as a voter, can you understand the concern of a voter who feels like someone who doesn't have a financial background to be our treasurer and responsible for that?
Again, the city of Oceanside is unique, and it has this team. It has the expertise. You have a treasury manager. You also have an assistant treasurer. And these individuals work with the Citizens Investment Oversight Committee to make sure that those investments are giving us, well, they're secure, because that's the number one issue, is preservation of principle, that they are secure, they're safe, but also they're giving us the return on investment that is needed and is at market rate is the best we can get.
So, Colleen, that does not satisfy you as a resident of Oceanside. What is it do you feel that is not adequate about this situation?
Well, again, I keep going back to the background, the training, and the experience that I believe are needed in those positions. Also, if one of them commits some kind of malfeasance while they're in office, you can't get rid of them without a recall or wait till the next election. If they were appointed people and they did something crazy, they'd be out of a job the next day because the city manager would get rid of them.
Okay, that's a valid point. So, Dennis, how would you respond to that? A possible,
Well,
more difficult to get rid of somebody who'd been elected than appointed if there was a problem.
Well, if it's a criminal situation, obviously they can be removed reasonably quickly. If it's not if it's a dispute as far as their abilities, I agree. That's up to the citizens to decide that, and it would require a recall. But if it's malfeasance or criminal element, act that they've committed, they can be removed, at least until someone else can be appointed or elected.
Would you like to respond to that at all?
Well, I was I was going to add that one of my concerns is that the whole process can and has in some instances become very political. For instance, a few years ago, we elected a candidate who had already died because some people picked up his campaign and ran with it because they didn't like the other person running. And most of the electorate, I don't think, even understood that the candidate had passed away. And it just became strictly a political fight.
Right. Now, I think this is perhaps at the heart of what many people are concerned about with this issue. And Dennis, how do you respond to that, to the idea that people perhaps don't want a political city treasurer or a city clerk? They want somebody who is more of a neutral official. So, if you elect them, doesn't that politicize the position?
It does, but I feel sorry for someone who doesn't want to have someone who's willing to speak up for them and to protect them. And again, the watchdog role is critical. We need somebody to be able to speak up, to have the backbone to confront the mayor, the city manager, the council, whoever it is that wants them to take the wrong course and to invest against the policies of the city. So again, I want that political person who is free from control of city manager and the city council.
Colleen, let me ask you whether being appointed by the city manager would actually, in effect, insulate the person from political pressure. I mean, that is an open question.
I believe it would, and the city council would have no oversight over that person. It would be the city manager, just as the city council can give direction to the city manager on concerns they have for the police department or the planning department, the fire department. They could give direction regarding the treasurer's department, but they don't do any direct influencing.
Do you have any concerns about the politicization of these two positions in the past? Have you seen some examples of it that you can quote for us?
Well, the one that I mentioned,
Right.
where we had a political fight, and the person who ended up getting elected had already passed away.
But when we're talking about political influences, we're usually looking at vested interests. I mean, what are the vested interests that we risk getting control of our finances or our, even our election procedure? The city clerk has a lot to do with that. So these are key roles. Where have we seen some vested interests that might actually threaten the neutrality of these positions?
I haven't seen it specifically here in Oceanside, but I think there is that opportunity for it to happen, the risk that it could happen. You could have someone run for treasurer who has a vested interest in how our money is invested. who's very popular, good at raising money, and makes good speeches.
So, Dennis, I mean, that may in fact have happened in the past. So, how do you
Somewhere,
respond to that?
probably has. Again, if you're going through the political process, you're presenting your credentials to the public, to the voters. They do a good job. I think voters, for the most part, have a much better sense of the integrity of an individual or the honesty of an individual. And I think it's easier to hide in an appointment situation than it is in an elected situation where the candidates have to go out and present their qualifications to the voters.
Now, in the case of our previous city clerk, Zach Beck, he was actually hired away from Oceanside to Escondido, where he's now being paid probably 4 times as much by the city of Escondido to do, in name at least, the same job. I mean, is that an indication, Dennis, that perhaps it's time for us to look at this as being a more professional position?
Well, it's an indication that if we do go with Measure K and have those positions appointed, that it's going to cost us a lot more because we're going to have to hire at that rate. But again, it's the role. Is the treasurer in Escondido the same as that in Oceanside? And they're not. There's much more responsibility for the investment selection in Escondido than there is in Oceanside. Oceanside, again, the treasurer is more of a supervisor. And we have that team that I mentioned of experts, and they do a very good job. We have an excellent staff in Oceanside and an excellent group of citizens who are on this investment committee.
Let me just ask you, Colleen, this has been in place since the 1880s, apparently, since Oceanside was established. And in 1976, was it? We voted on this again, and we decided, no, we still want to elect them. What is it that's changed now that you feel now, at this point, the city really needs to have an appointed clerk and treasurer?
Well, as far as the city clerk is concerned, elections have become much more complicated, much more vulnerable to hacking and that sort of thing. Our portfolio has grown considerably. When I was on the city council, it was $100,000. Now it's $350,000, which means we're doing a good job with our investments, and I'm certainly not complaining about that. I just think it's time that we came into the 21st century.
So the current city clerk, Zeb Navarro, has said that he doesn't want to run for city council, but he did actually run for council before unsuccessfully. Both our city clerk and our city treasurer have run for council unsuccessfully in the past, which does suggest that there is an element of politics in the motivation of people who run for these positions. I mean, Dennis, do you not see this as being a more appropriate position for a city council person to run than to run for a city clerk or a city treasurer?
Again, it depends on the role that they're playing. And in Oceanside, the role of the city clerk and the city treasurer is that of someone who is overseeing other experts in their fields. The city clerk's office has an assistant city clerk who does a lot of the grunt work. The city clerk actually acts as supervisor, and again, making sure it's consistent. What the actions of the clerk's office is that they're consistent with the law and following policies in the city. Zach Beck did a great job. He was a half-time employee, as is the treasurer. They get between $25,000 and $30,000 a year, and their motivation, I think, is more service-oriented and assuming this role of supervisor over a team of experts. And that's a unique role, and it's very effective. It's worked well for the city of Oceanside.
Right. I mean, you're saying they're more service-oriented, and that's what one would think. But it is worth noting that both of these the individuals who are currently holding these positions have run for positions on the city council. So, I mean, do you have some concerns, Colleen, that they may be hoping to influence city policy beyond the purview of their roles, even?
I haven't seen that from these people who are currently serving. I think it's a possibility for future candidates. Maybe they're looking to step up to city council, get some name recognition, and that's why they would run.
But the thing that you're most concerned about is their qualifications to do the job.
Correct.
Is my understanding. Let me just ask you about endorsements, because it's sometimes helpful to find out who is supporting and opposing an initiative. Colleen, can you tell us who is supporting Measure K?
Well, it was put on the ballot by a majority of the current city council. It's also been endorsed by several business groups, the Oceanside Chamber of Commerce, and several local businesses, my own business included. There are taxpayer advocates who are supporting this measure because they feel it's important to have a professional person, and they're looking at the portfolio.
Okay, thank you. And Dennis?
The people who oppose Measure K are primarily citizens who want to maintain the situation where the clerk and the treasurer are responsible and accountable to the citizens. Esther Sanchez, a city council person, also has taken a position against Measure K. But it's primarily citizens in Oceanside who want to have that accountability and transparency with the treasurer and the clerk.
So let me just ask you, Dennis, also we were talking about whether an individual who was elected might attempt to use it for more political purposes. Can you describe why it is that you feel that being appointed would be dangerous politically for the city?
I don't necessarily see that it's dangerous for the city. I think the city's done a good job in its appointments. I think the vast majority of positions that are appointed should be. But again, the treasurer and the city clerk are two positions that I believe do not fall in that category. The idea of accountability and transparency are critical, and I think you are more apt to get that when they are elected.
But you want them to be watchdogs, so
That is the role they assume.
Right. So have you got any evidence that there's been situations where you were glad you had a watchdog in those roles?
Well, later I was going to bring up the issue of Rosemary Jones here in Oceanside, who in 1999, as an elected city treasurer, prevented a scam from happening. She refused to turn over the authority to give funds to an organization that was later found by the Securities and Exchange Commission to have a Ponzi scheme going. Her independence by being elected made it so that the citizens of Oceanside did not lose the millions of dollars that the Securities and Exchange Commission representatives said that could have happened, except for her stubbornness, which, if anybody knew, you knew Rosemary. We love her, and she was stubborn, she was assertive, she was a watchdog that the people need.
And so, Colleen, I just want you to give your reaction to that situation. How would an appointed treasurer have been or be a better watchdog in this position?
Well, we were lucky we had Mary Jones as our elected treasurer at the time, or we'd have lost a lot of money. But I would point out that the elected treasurer for the County of Orange did invest their portfolio in some very risky investments, and the County of Orange had to file bankruptcy as a result of it. An appointed city treasurer would not even have the authority to sign a form like Rosemary was asked to sign and fortunately refused.
Okay. Interesting. Well, you've given us a lot to think about. I think we've come to the point now where you get your 2 minutes to give us a closing statement to wrap up the arguments. And so, Dennis, I'd like to invite you to start with your opposition.
Okay, the opposition, one of the points that we didn't really address is the idea of saving taxpayers' money. If you go to an appointed city clerk and city treasurer, it's going to at least triple or would be more than it'd be, 5-6 times the amount of money that the city now spends on two positions that, again, are volunteer in nature, at least to some extent because of the low pay that they get. and it's unnecessary. Also, what you want to do is look to see what the qualifications really should be for these positions. Honesty, integrity, good common sense, and the willingness to stand up to people who try to encourage unethical behavior are the critical elements. And we get that when you get elected officials, not when you get appointed officials.
Thank you, Dennis. So, Colleen, in favor of Measure K.
Well, what you get when you have appointed officials is you get people who have the experience and the qualifications, the background for the positions that they're being hired for. I do not think it would cost the city a great deal more money, because right now they are part-time positions. If they became full-time positions, some of the other positions in the city would probably be eliminated or reassigned in some other fashion. My main interest in this is that I want someone who's qualified and has experience to be watching our money, and someone who could be removed immediately if there was any malfeasance.
And in this day and age, I guess the same applies to the city clerk and our elections.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you both very much for filling us in on all of these issues. Thanks to Colleen O'Hara, who's been the spokesperson in favor of Measure K. That's this ballot measure that would make the Oceanside city treasurer and city clerk appointed by the city manager rather than elected. And thanks also to Dennis Martinek, who's been arguing against Measure K, saying we should continue to elect these positions. So the primary election is March the 3rd, and you can start voting by mail or early voting already. We already have our ballots in hand. So go out and talk to your friends and your neighbors about this and make your vote count. I'm Alison St. John. My co-host Kent Davey will return on future shows. Thank you so much for joining us on the KOCT Roundtable.